They never expected someone like her to hold such tremendous power. Dr. Tabitha Morgan walked onto the bustling airport tarmac, looking like any other passenger, except she wasn't. She was a senior flight inspector for the Federal Aviation Administration (FAA), charged with overseeing rigorous safety checks, validating credentials, and, if necessary, pulling entire fleets out of service. But for now, she had her gaze locked on Captain James Patterson, a man with a notorious record of arrogance. Moments after meeting her, he scoffed, dismissing her expertise solely because of her skin color. Little did he know his career would unravel in mere hours. Tabitha Morgan shifted her duffel bag as she stepped through the staff entrance at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. The roar of departing jets shook the massive glass panels, but she was used to this background thunder. It was, in fact, her calling. She'd spent over 2 decades immersed in the aviation world, first as an aerospace engineering student, then as a pilot, and now as a senior inspector for the FAA. Her gentle smile contrasted sharply with her unwavering determination. Each step she took seemed purposeful, matching the confidence instilled in her by countless hours of training and experience. In the past, Tabitha had been underestimated more times than she could count. Yet she'd climbed the ranks, surpassing colleagues who'd once questioned her intellect or her place in such a high-stakes field. Her spotless record made her one of the FAA's most trusted and respected. She had overseen dozens of surprise inspections at major airlines. Delta Airlines was no stranger to her presence, but this assignment felt different. Whispers of a combative pilot named Captain James Patterson had reached her desk. Rumor had it he flaunted rules and carried an air of entitlement that undermined co-pilots and flight attendants alike. Tabitha's dark brown eyes scanned the hangars in the distance, noting the strong presence of Boeing 737 jets in their overnight docking. She recalled reading that Captain Patterson was due to command Flight 672, a Boeing 737-900 bound for Los Angeles that afternoon. A typical routine check would involve verifying flight logs, assessing crew readiness, and ensuring all protocols matched FAA standards. However, the complaints about Patterson's behavior made it essential that she go deeper this time. The airline's management had effectively invited her to do a thorough investigation, but the message was also clear: handle him carefully. He was highly regarded for his decades of experience. Tabitha reached the staff lounge, which also served as a briefing room. Its walls were lined with framed photographs of proud Delta crews and historical milestones. A few pilots and attendants huddled around a table, making small talk about the day's flights. Recognizing Tabitha's ID badge, a young flight attendant approached her. "Dr. Morgan, I presume?" "My name is Jenna. We've been expecting you. Let me take you to the pre-flight meeting." Tabitha's face remained calm. She gave a polite nod and followed. She felt the eyes of other crew members trailing her, uncertain, maybe curious about who this woman was and why she carried herself with such quiet authority. The swirling rumors in the lounge hinted that she was no ordinary visitor. Jenna's voice trembled with a mixture of respect and nervousness. "We heard an FAA inspector would be joining us. We just didn't know. Your arrival's a bit short notice." Tabitha offered an understanding smile. She was used to these hush-hush visits. Surprise was part of the job, ensuring that her inspections were authentic and unfiltered. In the corridor, the sounds of rolling luggage, garbled announcements over the pass system, and the mechanical hum of air conditioning accompanied them. They stopped at a large conference room where uniformed pilots and flight attendants were filing in. The sign on the wall read, "Flight 672 Pre-Flight Briefing." "Captain Patterson is inside," Jenna whispered, shooting Tabitha a hesitant glance. He can be a bit difficult." Tabitha said nothing, but her expression hardened just a fraction. She'd handled more than a few difficult personalities in her time, from overconfident rookie captains to grizzled veterans who scoffed at paper pushers. She simply braced herself for the meeting and for Patterson. The pre-flight conference room was a rectangular space with large windows overlooking the runway. The shift schedule and weather reports filled the whiteboard. At the head of a central table stood a tall, broad-shouldered man with silver hair and impeccably pressed uniform stripes, Captain James Patterson. He exuded a commanding aura that the younger crew members seemed to respect, or perhaps fear. Next to him was his first officer, a mild-mannered pilot named Evan Rossi. Evan looked at Tabitha with polite curiosity. In fact, the entire room quieted as soon as she entered. Captain Patterson raised his head, and his penetrating grey eyes locked onto her. He seemed disconcerted by her presence, and even more so by her unassuming posture and casual attire. With a wry grin, he cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he began with a tone that was just a hair shy of condescending, "this is a restricted meeting for Delta flight crew. If you're here on a personal matter, I can direct you to the passenger waiting lounges." Tabitha didn't let his dismissal affect her composure. She stepped forward, pulling out her FAA credentials as calmly as possible. "Captain Patterson," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I'm Dr. Tabitha Morgan, FAA Senior Inspector. I'm here to observe and conduct an inspection for Flight 672. She placed her ID on the table for all to see. The moment seemed frozen. Patterson's eyes darted from the ID to Tabitha's face. A glimmer of doubt and something akin to indignation flashed across his features. "You're the FAA inspector?" he asked, failing to fully hide the disbelief in his voice. "Yes, sir," Tabitha replied, ignoring the condescension in his tone. "And I'd appreciate your cooperation. Today's inspection will be thorough, given your flight's significance and the standard FAA protocol. I'll also be verifying crew documentation, safety protocols, and passenger protocols." A ripple of tension spread throughout the room. Evan Rossi coughed nervously, fiddling with the edges of a flight manual. Meanwhile, the flight attendants threw cautious glances at the captain, who seemed on the brink of protesting. After a tense pause, Patterson forced a smile, though it hardly reached his eyes. "Very well, Dr. Morgan. We'll see how quickly we can get you the information you need." Tabitha nodded, maintaining her professional demeanor. She didn't miss the disdain that laced his every word, but she pretended not to notice. It wasn't her first rodeo. Jenna, standing in a corner, shot Tabitha a look of silent solidarity. Tabitha offered a reassuring smile before proceeding to ask standard pre-flight questions, reviewing the flight plan, expected weather patterns en route, and verifying if the crew had completed mandatory rest periods. She took notes meticulously, while Patterson tapped his pen against the table in barely masked impatience. During the entire briefing, Patterson maintained a clipped, aloof attitude, answering her questions quickly, often glancing at his watch. But as the rest of the crew left for final checks, he lingered. Leaning close, he spoke quietly. "Listen, Dr. Morgan, or whatever your credentials say, I've been flying for decades. I know how these inspections go. Usually some pencil pusher looks around, then waves us on our way. Just don't slow me down. We have schedules to keep. Got it?" Tabitha looked at him evenly, refusing to let his words rattle her. "Captain Patterson, I recommend you show the same level of respect to me that I show to you. I'm not here to slow you down. I'm here to ensure safety. This is routine, albeit thorough. If you've got nothing to hide, this will be straightforward." His jaw tightened, but she walked away calmly, leaving him stewing in his own frustration. Tabitha knew this day was just beginning, and she braced herself. She had an inkling Patterson's attitude was just the tip of a larger problem. After the briefing, Tabitha followed the crew onto the Boeing 737, a craft brimming with technology and safety features that she admired wholeheartedly. The crisp lines of the instrument panels and the hum of the auxiliary power unit greeted her with familiarity. The smell of stale coffee and the faint odor of pressurized air were old friends. Delta Airlines had a reputation for meticulous standards, and Tabitha was determined to see them upheld. She began with routine checks, cockpit instrumentation, flight manuals, cabin safety equipment, and emergency procedures. These tasks usually went seamlessly, except Patterson's simmering presence loomed in the cockpit. He made a show of occupying the pilot's seat, flipping switches, muttering comments about interfering inspectors under his breath. Evan Rossi attempted to mask his discomfort by politely answering Tabitha's queries about cross-check procedures and runway specs. Tabitha observed with a cool gaze, making notes on her electronic tablet. Halfway through the inspection, Patterson stood abruptly. "You know," he said loudly, "I've been flying these planes since before you probably even knew what an airplane was." He turned to Evan, ignoring Tabitha. "Do we really need a demonstration on how seatbelts work from someone who's never commanded a commercial flight in her life?" His voice reached the flight attendants preparing the galley. A hush fell throughout the front of the plane. Tabitha fought a twinge of irritation. Her flight hours as a pilot in both military and civilian contexts far exceeded Patterson's assumptions. However, she had learned long ago not to feed into the arrogance. Clearing her throat, Tabitha replied calmly, "Captain, if you'd like to discuss my qualifications, you're free to look up my record. For now, I'd like to verify your logbook." With an exasperated sigh, Patterson yanked open a storage compartment and shoved a leather-bound flight log into her hands. There was a sneer on his face, as if expecting her to be intimidated by his record of flight hours. Tabitha flipped through the log, scanning entries. She immediately recognized a few red flags, minor infractions, a couple of near deviations from standard procedure. Nothing huge, but collectively they formed a pattern. She looked up, meeting Patterson's gaze. "I see you've had a few disclaimers here. Certain notes about minor mechanical issues unreported until post-flight. And a couple of times you've stepped outside recommended altitude adjustments." Patterson shrugged dismissively. "Every pilot has a few dings in their record. Doesn't mean anything. Maybe the FAA should train more inspectors about real flying." He stepped back into the cockpit seat, effectively ignoring her presence while flipping overhead switches. The flight deck instruments whirred to life, the plane's systems calibrating. Tabitha inwardly sighed. It wasn't the first time she'd encountered an ego as large as the aircraft itself. As long as safety standards were upheld, she could handle petty remarks. But she also knew prejudice had a way of festering if left unchecked. Patterson's refusal to believe she was truly the inspector was not only unprofessional, but laced with something far more insidious. Her phone buzzed. She glanced down. A message from her FAA colleague read, "Heard you're dealing with Patterson. Watch your back, he's caused trouble for inspectors before." Tabitha put the phone away, lips pressed tightly. "I'll continue my checks now, Captain. I trust you'll cooperate." There was no reply from Patterson, only a flick of his wrist as he read through a weather update. Evan attempted an apologetic smile, and Tabitha nodded back. There was a sense among the rest of the crew, flight attendants, ground staff, even the gate agents, that Patterson wasn't a team player. And for the sake of the flight, Tabitha needed to get to the bottom of it. Before leaving the cockpit to inspect the cabin, she turned once more. "Captain, we'll be carrying passengers soon. Let's ensure this goes smoothly." Patterson gave her a mocking salute, and she walked out. Tabitha methodically checked the cabin equipment, life vests, seatbelt functionality, overhead compartments, emergency escape path lighting. All seemed in order. She greeted the flight attendants, each of them bustling with pre-boarding tasks. Some recognized Tabitha's FAA badge and offered bright smiles. Others showed subdued curiosity, but overall they were more welcoming than Patterson. She paused at row 10 to watch a new flight attendant, a trainee named Luz, demonstrating how to secure the overhead compartments. The young woman fumbled with the latch, flustered under Tabitha's watchful eye. Trying to be supportive, Tabitha gently walked her through the correct procedure. "Don't worry," she said softly. "It can be tricky at first." Luz looked relieved. "Thank you, Dr. Morgan. Captain Patterson has been, well, he can be tough." Tabitha's expression grew thoughtful. "He's known for that, from what I've heard. But just stick to your training and the official procedures. You'll do fine." As she progressed down the aisle, she noticed small signs that some of Patterson's arrogance might be scaring the cabin crew. A chipped interphone handset near the forward galley that hadn't been reported, presumably because no one wanted to raise Patterson's ire over a minor issue. Another flight attendant confided that Patterson hated being second-guessed, so they often avoided bringing up small mechanical quirks until the next shift. Such an environment was troubling. Minor issues could escalate quickly in aviation if not addressed. Back at the galley, Jenna updated her. "We'll begin boarding in about 10 minutes, Dr. Morgan. Any last checks?" Tabitha's mind flicked to Patterson's logbook entries. "I'll need to speak with the gate agents as well. Could you direct me?" Jenna pointed her down the ramp. As Tabitha walked off the plane, she passed Patterson returning from a phone call. He stared at her with barely concealed annoyance. "Look," he said abruptly, blocking her path. "I don't know what bone you have to pick with me, but I have never failed an inspection in my life. You can note all your little details, but I guarantee you won't find anything truly incriminating." Tabitha maintained composure, refusing to engage in his antagonistic tone. "I'm just doing my job, Captain, and if you have any further complaints, I suggest addressing them with my office directly." She stepped past him, making it clear she wouldn't be intimidated. Out in the waiting area, ticketed passengers began gathering with carry-ons, each scanning digital boarding passes. The gate agent, a middle-aged man named Robert, recognized Tabitha's badge immediately. He nodded in respect. "Heard you were doing a spot check. Everything okay?" Tabitha offered a polite but tight smile. "So far, I've found a few minor oversights. Nothing major, but the flight crew dynamic is concerning." Robert sighed. "Patterson, right? Listen, I've had my run-ins with him. The guy's practically an institution here, but a lot of staff don't feel comfortable around him. They say he's temperamental and, well, old-fashioned. Last month, he had a confrontation with a Latina flight attendant about whether she was fluent enough to serve certain routes. If there's ever a complaint, management hushes it up because of his seniority." Tabitha frowned. "I'll keep that in mind. Thank you for your honesty." The overhead announcement signaled the start of boarding. Robert welcomed priority passengers. Tabitha watched from the corner, her mind racing with the puzzle pieces. A pilot with a pattern of disrespect and minor procedural lapses. An environment that discouraged staff from reporting small problems. And then, overshadowing all of it, Patterson's blatant disbelief in her authority, perhaps influenced by her being both a woman and black. She wondered if Patterson's reluctance to adapt or listen to newer regulations might one day escalate into a true safety hazard. The FAA took such concerns seriously, but to ground a pilot immediately would require something more concrete than attitude problems. She needed facts, documented evidence, something undeniable. Returning to the aircraft, Tabitha resolved to keep a closer eye on Patterson during the flight's early stages. If he slipped up, if he revealed a truly dangerous disregard for policy, she'd have grounds to intervene. But for now, she had to follow official protocols. Passengers began filing in, stowing carry-ons in overhead bins, oblivious to the tension simmering among the flight crew. Tabitha found a seat near the front, so she could monitor the cockpit door and observe the safety briefing. Jenna was addressing passengers, smiling politely, guiding them to seats. From her vantage point, Tabitha couldn't help but notice Patterson stepping into the aisle for a moment, scanning the cabin. His gaze landed on Tabitha, and for a split second, pure indignation flared in his eyes. He turned away quickly, but Tabitha had seen enough to confirm her suspicion. He resented her presence. The plane's engines hummed louder, external power was disconnected, and the doors secured. Soon, they'd push back from the gate. Tabitha quietly fastened her seatbelt, preparing for the possibility that this flight was about to reveal far more than a standard inspection would suggest. The Boeing 737 taxied to the runway as Tabitha watched the seatbelt sign illuminate overhead. Their cabin lights dimmed slightly, and the flight attendants took their places for the safety demonstration. Luz, the trainee, seemed nervous in front of the full passenger load, but she performed her role diligently. Meanwhile, Tabitha's eyes flicked to the cockpit door. She wondered how Patterson and Evan were handling the pre-takeoff checklist. Moments later, the engines roared to life, and the aircraft sped down the runway. Liftoff was smooth, albeit with a slight bank to the left. For the initial climb, Tabitha monitored the overhead displays for altitude changes. She noted everything: airspeed adjustments, flaps retraction, landing gear stowage. This was standard procedure for her. She had done it hundreds of times. Yet the subtle tension in the cabin was anything but standard. Perhaps it was Patterson's volatile energy. Perhaps the cabin crew felt it too. She could see Jenna's polite but forced smiles as she reassured passengers during the seatbelt sign's extended illumination. Finally, the plane reached cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign switched off with a soft chime. Tabitha stood carefully, navigating the narrow aisle. She caught the eye of a flight attendant, who gave a small nod, opening the cockpit door upon request. Once inside the cockpit, she observed Patterson and Evan at work. The instrument panel glowed with the steady hum of autopilot engaged. Patterson glanced over his shoulder. "Didn't think we'd have company in the cockpit," he said, his voice cold. "As part of the inspection, I need to verify you're following standard procedures," Tabitha replied, voice calm yet authoritative. "Everything looking good, Captain?" Patterson gripped the yoke with a bit more force than necessary, though the autopilot handled most functions. "Fine," he answered bluntly. "We're cruising at 35,000 feet. Winds are mild, no sign of turbulence. If that's all you need to know," Evan interjected politely, "weather's clear until the Rocky Mountains, Dr. Morgan. We'll be monitoring crosswinds, but it looks like an easy flight to LA." Tabitha nodded. "Good to hear." She observed the displays, verifying the flight path was properly set to the assigned route. Everything seemed routine on the surface, yet Patterson's tension remained palpable. After a minute of silence, he swiveled his seat to face Tabitha fully, a mocking grin playing on his lips. "Tell me, Dr. Morgan, how does one go from reading about planes in textbooks to becoming an inspector? Must have been a real leap." Tabitha's blood stirred. It was obvious he was challenging her qualifications, perhaps implying her advanced academic title was worthless compared to his hands-on experience. She forced a measured smile. "My father was an Air Force pilot," she said, tone measured. "I flew in multiple training programs before completing my doctoral research in aviation safety protocols. I've logged thousands of flight hours. So, yes, I do know what I'm looking at and what I'm talking about." For a moment, Patterson's bravado flickered. He hadn't expected such an extensive background, but he recovered quickly, shooting Evan a glance as if to say, "She's still an outsider." Tabitha decided not to push further, but she made a mental note. Patterson's arrogance was a genuine threat to the harmonious functioning of his team. She left the cockpit, returning to her seat, resolute in her determination to catch any serious breaches. An hour into the flight, Tabitha moved about the cabin again, noting the flight attendants' performance. They offered drinks, snacks, and occasional announcements. The passengers were mostly calm. A few were engrossed in movies or laptop work. Everything seemed ordinary until a sudden jolt rattled the plane. The flight attendant serving row 12 momentarily lost her grip on a beverage cart. A murmur of concern went through the cabin. Tabitha quickly checked the overhead seatbelt sign. It wasn't on. Another jolt, more severe this time, caused startled gasps. Over the par, Patterson's voice crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing minor turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." Tabitha listened with a mix of caution and suspicion. The forecast indicated the flight should have had clear skies for at least another hour. She wondered if Patterson had neglected to adjust the altitude to avoid known turbulence, or if the weather changed abruptly. She decided to check the cockpit once more. By the time she reached the cockpit door, the plane rocked again. Patterson was in the midst of adjusting altitude. Evan's eyes flicked worriedly between the instruments. Tabitha gripped the back of the co-pilot's seat to steady herself. "What's going on?" she demanded, scanning the radar. Patterson's voice was clipped. "Unexpected weather system, some crosswinds. We're adjusting altitude to 37,000 feet. Tabitha peered at the radar. Indeed, a patch of turbulent air was showing, but it was something that flight planning tools usually flagged well in advance. "Did dispatch warn us about this corridor?" she asked. Evan's response was drowned out by Patterson snapping, "I'm the captain, Dr. Morgan. I decide how we handle turbulence." "Not you." Tabitha refused to be intimidated. "Captain, I'm not giving orders. I'm asking if you received any updated weather data. This is precisely why real-time flight data is crucial." Patterson ignored her, focusing on leveling out the plane. The rough patches continued for several minutes, jostling passengers. Eventually, the ride smoothed out, leaving only an echo of tension in its wake. Tabitha studied Patterson's face. Was the turbulence genuinely unexpected, or was it a case of ignoring data that might have indicated a route adjustment? If the latter, it was a reckless oversight. Patterson exhaled sharply, removing his cap to run a hand through his hair. "You see, we handled it. No big deal." Tabitha noted the sweat on his brow. He might have said it was no big deal, but the entire crew felt that lurch in their stomachs. She retreated to let him do his job, deciding to review data logs after the plane landed. Something about this encounter didn't sit right with her. Sinking into her seat again, Tabitha realized she was in for a challenging confrontation once they were on the ground. The tension between her and Patterson, the questions about his compliance, the possibility that he either missed or ignored a crucial weather update, it all spelled trouble. She braced herself for the next few hours, acutely aware that a storm was brewing beyond mere turbulence. After another hour in flight, the turbulence subsided entirely and the passengers relaxed. Flight attendants resumed service with renewed calm, offering beverages and snacks. Yet Tabitha couldn't shake her concerns. She watched Patterson's occasional announcements over the par, carefully noting the tone and content. Eventually, the plane began its descent toward Los Angeles International Airport. The once cloudy skies cleared, offering a panoramic view of the coastline. The seatbelt sign chimed on again, and Tabitha felt that familiar press of cabin pressure changes. In the final 30 minutes of flight, the tension in the cockpit seemed to re-emerge like an undercurrent in calm waters. As the aircraft approached the runway, Tabitha remained in her seat, seatbelt fastened. Landing gear deployed with a mechanical whir, flaps extended systematically, and the Boeing 737 touched down with a slight bounce, typical of a short final approach. Patterson guided the jet to the gate smoothly enough, but there was an evident tightness in his posture. Upon docking at the gate, the seatbelt sign switched off and passengers stood, collecting overhead luggage. The flight attendants helped older passengers, while the rest lined up in the aisle. Tabitha waited near the cockpit, intending to speak with Patterson and Evan one last time before concluding her in-flight inspection. After the last passenger stepped off, the flight crew gathered in a corner near the cockpit door. Patterson stepped into the aisle, removing his cap and fixing Tabitha with a condescending stare. "So, Dr. Morgan," he began, "was our little flight up to your lofty FAA standards?" The sarcasm in his voice was palpable. Tabitha took a steadying breath. She reminded herself that she was here as a professional, not to spar. "I'd like to debrief you on a few points, Captain." She glanced at the flight attendants and first officer. "I have some preliminary notes before we finalize the report." He folded his arms. "Oh, by all means, enlighten me." Tabitha gestured for the others to stay. "First, there was unanticipated turbulence. I'd like to confirm if you received the updated meteorological data from dispatch. We need to verify protocol." He cut her off with a derisive laugh. "This again." It was minor turbulence. "Pilots deal with that every day." "Yes, pilots do," Tabitha said, maintaining eye contact. "But as an inspector, I have an obligation to investigate any possibility that updated data was ignored." "Ignored?" he repeated, voice rising. "You're accusing me of negligence? Do you know how many thousands of hours I've flown?" Evan stepped in, trying to defuse the situation. "Captain, Doctor." Morgan is only following standard procedure. The turbulence was unexpected. Dispatch might not have had time to forward the new data. Tabitha continued calmly. "I'm not accusing you, Captain. I'm clarifying events. Our final report is about safety protocols, which includes verifying that the pilot adhered to or at least checked all relevant updates. Also, I want to address certain items in your flight log about unreported mechanical issues. Minor as they may be, they're still recorded." His nostrils flared. "Those are non-issues. Are we done?" This was the second time he dismissed her concerns. She glanced at the faces around her: Evan, Jenna, Luz, and a couple of other attendants. They looked uneasy, likely anticipating an outburst. Tabitha realized that Patterson's track record of intimidation might have kept them silent for too long. "Captain Patterson," she said, voice firm, "we need to finish the debrief. If you prefer to do this in private, we can proceed to the Delta Operations Office. Otherwise, I can complete my preliminary notes here, with your crew as witnesses." He sneered. "Fine. Let's do it in private. I'm not letting you disrespect me in front of my team." Tabitha didn't rise to the bait. "All right, let's go." As they walked off the aircraft, Patterson shot a glare at his crew, as if warning them not to say anything. Evan looked torn, but he nodded to Tabitha. She understood that he likely had more details to share, perhaps about Patterson's behavior in flight, but fear of reprisal kept him silent in that moment. The Delta Operations Office at LAX was a maze of desks, computers, and digital boards displaying flight statuses. Employees bustled about, speaking into headsets or hurriedly typing updates. Patterson strode ahead, ignoring greetings from co-workers, and found an empty conference room. He held the door open with one arm, gesturing for Tabitha to enter first. She stepped inside, and he slammed the door shut behind them. The small room had a table, a phone, and a glass partition that blurred the view of the outside hallway. Tabitha placed her tablet on the table, turning to face him. "All right, Captain Patterson," she began. "Let's go through this methodically. The FAA requires—" He cut her off, voice echoing in the enclosed space. "I won't be lectured by some novice." His face contorted with anger. "I've been at Delta longer than you've even known how to spell aviation. Now I have to put up with you pretending you're in charge just because the FAA gave you some shiny badge." Tabitha felt her pulse quicken, but her training helped her remain composed. "Captain, the FAA is in charge of aviation safety. That's non-negotiable. My authority here isn't up for debate." He scoffed. "Authority? Let me be frank, I've seen your type come and go, affirmative action hires, parading your degrees around like you're hot stuff. But you step into a cockpit, and you have no idea what real flying is." A moment of stunned silence filled the room. Tabitha's gaze bore into him. She'd faced prejudice before, but the blatant way he spat those words stung. Carefully she inhaled and spoke, voice dangerously calm. "I see. So, it's not just my position you doubt. It's me, my skin color, my gender, my credentials. Is that it, Captain Patterson?" He said nothing, his silence more damning than any denial would have been. Tabitha's mind raced. The FAA took discrimination very seriously. Any sign of prejudice that might compromise safety or create a hostile environment was grounds for disciplinary action. She had more than enough reason to file a report, but she wanted to handle this systematically. "Let me be clear," she said, leaning forward. "I served in the Air Force, I've flown commercial routes, and I've devoted my life to ensuring flight safety. I know exactly what I'm doing, and I can guarantee you that the FAA will take a keen interest in your remarks." He rolled his eyes, but said nothing further. So she continued. "Now, about the flight log discrepancies, the unreported minor mechanical issues, and the questions around the turbulence. These are serious. Combined with your conduct, they raise the possibility of immediate action. I wouldn't push your luck," he muttered, glaring at her. Tabitha lifted her chin. "I'm not pushing luck, Captain. I'm fulfilling my duty." She tapped her tablet. "Your record reveals repeated minor infractions, many of which revolve around not adhering to updated memos or bulletins. We can't ignore that, especially with your attitude towards safety procedures." "Am I fired?" he asked sarcastically, but there was a flicker of concern behind his bravado. "That's not for me to decide alone," Tabitha said, though part of her knew she had significant influence as a senior inspector. "However, I can ground you pending an investigation. Given your behavior and the patterns I've seen, that's a strong possibility." His face reddened. "You do that, and I promise you'll regret it. I've got friends in high places, my union senior management. I'll make calls. I'll drag your name through the mud." Tabitha had heard such threats before. They never ended well for the person making them. "If you want to escalate, go right ahead, but my official report, combined with evidence and testimonies from your crew, will carry weight. Possibly more weight than whatever calls you plan to make." For a moment, their gazes locked in a silent standoff. Patterson's chest heaved, and Tabitha felt both anger and resolve coursing through her. She kept thinking about the safety of future passengers. No matter how experienced a pilot might be, if bigotry or arrogance stood in the way of standard procedures, it was a ticking time bomb. Just then, a knock sounded on the glass partition. Evan stood there, looking anxious. Tabitha opened the door, and the young first officer stepped inside, glancing nervously at Patterson before addressing Tabitha. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Evan said, voice tremulous, "but I think you should know something." The co-pilot on Patterson's last flight, he reported potential altitude deviations that Patterson ignored, but the report was never fully processed. And about the turbulence? Dispatch did send a last-minute update indicating we should adjust the route. Patterson turned off the data feed in the cockpit, saying he'd handle it himself. Tabitha's eyebrows shot up. This was damning. When was this, Evan? "Right before we hit turbulence, Dr. Morgan. I was too afraid to speak up. I didn't want to lose my job." He lowered his eyes. "But I can't keep quiet anymore. Safety is on the line." Patterson's face contorted in fury. "You ungrateful," Tabitha held up a hand, silencing him. She addressed Evan. "Thank you for telling me. This corroborates my suspicions." She turned back to Patterson. "Captain Patterson, I'm grounding you as of this moment, pending an official FAA investigation." His voice rose in a near shout. "You can't do that!" Tabitha calmly pulled out her phone, dialing her FAA supervisor's direct line. "Yes," she said to the person on the other end. "I'm at LAX, flight 672. I have cause to ground the pilot immediately." I'm recommending a full investigation into safety violations and discriminatory behavior. Even in the small space, the silence roared as Patterson realized the gravity of the situation. His threats hung in the air, but Tabitha pressed on, detailing the situation to her supervisor. By the time she ended the call, Patterson's career was on a knife's edge. Tabitha exited the conference room, leaving Patterson behind in a silent rage, with Evan in tow. Outside, the operations staff sensed the tension. Tabitha found a quiet corner to debrief Evan further. "You did the right thing," she assured him. "I know it wasn't easy." He sighed, relief and fear mingling in his eyes. "Patterson is powerful here. He's been a pilot for so long, everyone's scared of him." Tabitha placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "I understand, but your testimony is crucial. If there's a pattern of ignoring safety protocols, the FAA has to know." Suddenly, a flurry of voices erupted behind them. Patterson charged out of the conference room, phone pressed to his ear. He was barking into it. "No, that's not the way it happened. She's twisting everything. I'm telling you, get me someone from upper management immediately." He glared at Tabitha, pointing a finger. "You'll regret this, mark my words." Tabitha stood her ground, unwavering. "Captain Patterson, you're no longer permitted to operate a Delta flight until the investigation concludes. The FAA will coordinate with Delta management and your union." Patterson shook his head in disbelief, still shouting into his phone as he stormed off, leaving Tabitha and Evan to watch him go. A few curious employees approached, but Tabitha dismissed them politely. Over the next hour, Tabitha filed an immediate formal report on her tablet. She included every detail: Patterson's overt hostility, his disregard for updated dispatch data, the minor mechanical oversights, and, most importantly, his bigoted remarks. She also cited the new testimony from Evan. Meanwhile, she coordinated with her FAA supervisor to ensure Patterson's flight privileges were revoked temporarily. The official procedure was that Patterson would be suspended, subject to a disciplinary hearing. By the time Tabitha finished, her nerves were raw. The emotional toll of confronting such blatant discrimination and disregard for safety was heavy. Yet she felt a sense of resolve, knowing she'd done her part to protect passengers and crew from a pilot who refused to follow essential protocols. Delta Airlines management wasted no time calling Tabitha in for a discussion. Seated at a polished wooden table in a corporate conference room overlooking the LAX tarmac, she faced a panel of three: a senior HR manager, a regional flight operations director, and a union representative. The HR manager, a woman named Dina, initiated the conversation. "Dr. Morgan, we understand you've grounded Captain James Patterson. That's a serious move. We'd like to get your account of events." Tabitha recounted everything: her pre-flight observations, Patterson's dismissive attitude, the suspicious handling of turbulence updates, and finally, his bigoted statements. She quoted him verbatim, her voice even. Their faces darkened. The union representative took notes while the flight operations director asked clarifying questions. "Have you any documented evidence of these statements?" "In part," Tabitha replied. "I have written notes taken during the inspection and multiple witnesses." The cockpit audio records might also capture some of his remarks, though not all, since some were made outside the cockpit. Additionally, First Officer Evan Rossi has provided a statement. Dina frowned. "We've had minor complaints about Patterson's demeanor in the past, but none so severe. Still, discrimination and safety violations are a grave concern. We'll be cooperating fully with the FAA." Tabitha nodded. "I appreciate that. I'd also like to note that Patterson threatened to retaliate. He mentioned calling in favors, tarnishing my reputation and so forth." The flight operations director sighed. "That's unfortunate. We can't comment on any personal vendetta he might attempt." But we can ensure that if the FAA found cause to ground him, Delta will respect that decision. Of course, this will go through union procedures. The union representative shifted in his seat. Captain Patterson has rights, of course. We'll investigate these allegations. However, Dr. Morgan, I want to be clear. We're not ignoring you. We just need to follow due process. Tabitha understood the bureaucracy. I have no intention of circumventing procedure, but in the interest of passenger safety, I must stand by the grounding. He cannot fly until these matters are resolved. There was a moment of silence as they digested her words. Finally, Dina thanked Tabitha for her time, promising a swift investigation. As Tabitha left the room, she felt both relieved and weary. The wheels of corporate and union processes could turn slowly, but for now, Patterson was off the cockpit schedule. Over the next few days, headlines began to circulate in certain aviation circles. Veteran pilot grounded by FAA for safety concerns, or more sensationally, Delta captain allegedly insults black female inspector, faces investigation. Patterson's name wasn't always cited explicitly, but the rumors spread quickly among airline staff. Tabitha tried to keep her head down, focusing on other pending inspections. Yet her phone buzzed with calls and messages from colleagues, offering everything from concern to congratulations for taking a stand. Some worried Patterson's union ties would cause trouble. Others applauded her for exposing someone many considered a bully. In the midst of this storm, she received an unexpected visitor at her hotel near LAX, Captain Evan Rossi. Nervously clutching a folder of documents, he asked if they could talk. Seated in the hotel lobby, Evan explained, "I collected a few statements from other pilots and attendants who've had issues with Patterson. They were too scared to report him before. I want you to have them." Tabitha glanced at the folder. "That's brave of you, Evan." He exhaled. "Honestly, I was terrified, but once people heard what happened in our flight, they came forward. Some had stories about Patterson ignoring maintenance warnings, skipping certain steps in checklists if he felt they were unnecessary. Others mentioned discriminatory remarks or belittling new crew members. Tabitha felt a swell of relief. This meant the investigation wouldn't hinge solely on her word against Patterson's. She thanked Evan and promised to forward the documents to the FAA. That evening, she found a quiet corner of the hotel lounge and went through each testimony. It was disheartening to read how many had faced Patterson's wrath or witnessed his arrogance. One flight attendant described how he refused to read a note about a faulty reading light, saying it was too trivial to log. Another described sexist remarks. A pilot recounted an incident where Patterson insisted on a dangerously low approach in adverse weather, ignoring automated warnings until the last moment. Every page confirmed that grounding him had been the correct choice. A week later, the official FAA hearing date was set. Patterson was conspicuously absent from the airline's rosters. Word on the grapevine was that he'd lawyered up, threatening to sue the FAA for defamation and claiming prejudice against him due to reverse discrimination. Tabitha tried not to let it unnerve her. She had the truth on her side, plus statements from numerous witnesses, yet she couldn't ignore the pang of anxiety. She knew how ugly these cases could get, especially when bigotry and pride intermingled. Late one evening, her phone rang, an unknown number. When she answered, a gravelly voice on the other end hissed, "You think you can just ruin a man's life because you have some fancy government job? You'll pay for this." The line went dead. Tabitha's heart thundered in her chest. She reported the threat to her supervisor, who assured her that such intimidation tactics wouldn't be tolerated. They suspected Patterson or someone aligned with him was behind it, but tracing the call might be difficult. Despite the fear, Tabitha pressed on. She refused to be intimidated into silence, recalling her father's words from her youth, "The moment you let fear guide your decisions, you give your power away." As the hearing date approached, more staff from Delta came forward, bolstering the case against Patterson. HR documents surfaced, noting previous complaints that had been quietly settled or brushed aside. The pattern was undeniable: a man who believed himself untouchable, who cared more about his pride than about standard regulations or the well-being of his colleagues. The FAA hearing took place in a no-frills conference room at a regional office near LAX. Tabitha arrived early, a folder of documents in hand, each meticulously sorted. She took her seat at a long, rectangular table, facing a panel of 3 FAA officials: her supervisor, a legal counsel for the agency, and a senior inspector from another region. Patterson arrived, flanked by his attorney and a union rep. Gone was the self-assured smirk. He looked harried, though still defiant. He shot Tabitha a venomous look before sitting. The hearing commenced with formalities. Patterson's attorney tried to argue that Tabitha had a personal vendetta, that she was on a power trip. They presented Patterson's years of commendations, highlighting the thousands of safe flights he'd logged. Then Tabitha and her supporters laid out evidence in painstaking detail. Evan Rossi testified about the flight in question. Flight attendants described demeaning encounters. Maintenance staff reported repeated oversights in Patterson's logs. A thick packet of documents revealed patterns of ignoring bulletins, skipping minor mechanical checks, and receiving multiple notes of complaint. Throughout it all, Patterson seethed, occasionally muttering curses under his breath. His attorney tried to spin the narrative: Patterson is a veteran pilot. We all have off days. The alleged remarks were taken out of context, but the weight of testimony from so many different sources was overwhelming. Tabitha spoke last, recounting how Patterson refused to believe she was the inspector, how he specifically demeaned her background and identity. She emphasized that personal prejudice and disregard for rules are inseparable in aviation. They both undermine a cohesive, safety-first culture. After hours of deliberation, the panel asked everyone to step out. The tension in the hallway was thick. Patterson paced, occasionally glaring at Tabitha. She remained silent, focusing on her breath. Eventually, they were called back in. The FAA supervisor cleared his throat and read the decision. Captain James Patterson's commercial pilot license would be revoked, pending a mandatory retraining program and an extended probation period if he ever reapplied. The evidence was deemed conclusive: repeated minor safety violations, an act of discrimination, and harassment of an FAA official. Patterson's mouth dropped. His attorney sputtered protests, but the decision was final. The union rep simply shook his head, seeing the writing on the wall. Tabitha felt a wave of relief and justice. She locked eyes with Patterson one final time. He looked devastated, decades of unchallenged arrogance crumbling in an instant. His karmic reckoning had arrived, and there was no escaping it. Weeks passed. An internal Delta memo confirmed that Patterson was let go from the airline. He lost his seniority, pension benefits were under review, and his professional reputation was in tatters. The media caught wind of the official FAA ruling, and articles appeared highlighting the dangers of letting arrogance and discrimination fester in the cockpit. Tabitha, meanwhile, continued her inspections, albeit with a new measure of respect from airline staff who had heard about her showdown. She remained humble, focusing on her work. She hoped that Patterson would learn from his mistakes, though she doubted he'd ever admit fault. Rumors swirled that Patterson tried applying for smaller regional airlines, but none wanted the liability of hiring a pilot who'd lost his license due to misconduct. He found himself shut out of an industry he once dominated. There were whispers that he was drowning in debt from legal fees, that his friends in high places had abandoned him to protect their own reputations. One day, Tabitha was sitting in an airport cafe between flights when she caught a glimpse of a man slumped on a bench near the arrivals area. He wore a wrinkled jacket, hair disheveled. For a moment, she thought it was a stranger, then she recognized him, James Patterson. He looked up, eyes hollow. Gone was the bravado. He said nothing, and she was too surprised to speak. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over her: pity, satisfaction, and lingering bitterness. Eventually, she just walked away, leaving him to confront the consequences of his actions. No threats, no pleas. Merely a broken man who had, through his own hubris and bigotry, lost everything. Thank you for joining me on this emotional, dramatic journey that highlights the power of truth, professionalism, and standing up to discrimination. Dr. Tabitha Morgan's unwavering commitment to aviation safety and her refusal to be intimidated remind us that true authority lies not in old habits or titles, but in expertise, diligence, and moral conviction. Captain Patterson's shocking downfall illustrates how arrogance and bigotry can lead even the most experienced individuals to ruin. It's a cautionary tale about the importance of accountability and respect in high-stakes professions, and, indeed, in all walks of life. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Your support helps me bring more eye-opening stories to life, showcasing narratives that reflect the triumph of courage and justice. Stay tuned for more dramatic and inspiring tales. Safe travels, everyone.